Thank you, Mayor Janakovich. Thank you for your support and your leadership here. Thank you, Senator Wozniak. Thank you, State Representative Brian Marvin, who's here, and all the other folks who have been working through some tough times to help Johnstown and the surrounding area. I want to thank Dr. Jen Spector, the president of Pitt-Johnstown, for welcoming me here. And thanks for showing up. I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I've been here often over the last 25 years. Your late Congressman John Murtha was a good friend of mine, and we did a lot of work together to try to bring jobs here. He proved that you could be a progressive on economics and stand up for the national defense. He proved that the government could be an instrument for helping the private sector create jobs, increase middle-class incomes, and reduce poverty. And that's basically what we're up against now. 8 years ago, we had this terrible financial crash. We have good economic, I met at a university, I can say this, only lecture point. We have economic information that's good going back 400 years. Not a single solitary nation in the history of the world has undergone what we went through and gotten over it in less than 10 years. Now the good news is we got our jobs back in the aggregate in 7.5 years, but the incomes haven't gone up. So poverty is rising. 80% of the people hadn't had a raise after inflation since the last crash. About half the American people after inflation are living on what they were living on the last day I was president. And that's a tough deal. And you've seen it played out here. So how do you decide who to vote for? I think it's important to realize and believe, based on my 8 years as president, when you did pretty well. It's the only time in 50 years we all rose together. First, we are so close to being able to do that again. And I know it's hard to believe it in the communities in this part of Pennsylvania where people feel left out and left behind. Second, we can't do it unless the government has the right policies and works with the private sector and with the universities to create a whole new future. Third, we can't forget we live in a dangerous world, and all of our recovery could be wrecked if Europe falls apart with the biggest refugee crisis since World War II, or if the Middle East falls apart and sparks a global depression, or if Russia causes problems in Ukraine and gets Europe involved in a war. I mean, there are a lot of things that are going to happen. It really matters who's commander-in-chief. And finally, it means to me that the most important quality we need in the next president is that, in my case, she should be a change maker. We had a great primary in New York last night. And, well, I think you should know that the details are pretty interesting and relevant to Pennsylvania's choice. She won every demographic group in New York City for a simple reason. They know Wall Street can't break Main Street again because of that Dodd-Frank bill. They know the big banks are getting smaller right now. They know there are 50 to 60,000 fewer people working on Wall Street today than there were the day of the crash. And New York is rising on new entrepreneurs, bringing manufacturing back to the Bronx, to Brooklyn, to Queens. And that Manhattan's rising because of young people, like the young people in this audience, who are going out, starting their own businesses, building a new future, so we can all rise together. She won in Arkansas, which is a lot like the middle part of Pennsylvania, where she hasn't lived in 18 years. She got 2/3 of the vote. Why? Because they know her. And they know that she always makes something good happen. And they trust her to lead us the rest of the way out of this mess we've been in so we can all rise together. In New York, I'll give you a couple of examples. One of her great supporters as a senator was the head of the Farm Bureau on Long Island. And he endorsed her for re-election. Right before she ran for president, she was re-elected in 2006, so he endorsed her, and the press was stunned. They ran up to this guy, Joe Gergela, and they said, "I thought you were a Republican." He said, "I thought so too." He said, "Well, how can you be for her?" He said, "Look, every politician sounds good at election time. I've been here a long time. But in all my years, she is the only person we ever sent to Washington who actually did something to help the family farmers in New York. I am for her." Last night, she talked about one of the first responders after 9/11 who suffered, as many of them did, from cancers and various respiratory problems. He said she took the lead in making sure that none of us were left behind. Not the first responders, not the second responders. They were there. And I'm still here today because I got the support from my country to honor my service. That's what you want in a president. And there was a working mother, single mother, who talked about how she graduated from college because her child had access to the Children's Health Insurance Program, and she was not bankrupted, so she could go ahead and finish her education and get a decent job and support her child. That's what you want in a president. And here is basically Hillary's economic and social program. First of all, the biggest problem in this country still is that too many people who want to work can't work, and too many people are stuck in dead-end jobs where they never get a pay raise. And there is still too much inequality. But the inequality problem today is not so much Wall Street wrecking Main Street. The government has that under control and can deal with it. The inequality today is all these big corporations that are giving 80 to 90% of their profits back to the shareholders and the top management and never giving their employees a pay raise. Corporations will literally pull up stakes in America and move jobs overseas, even when they're making a profit. Look, if somebody's going broke, you can understand it. But when they're making a profit and doing it, they're doing it for one simple reason. All they care about is making their annual shareholder target and giving the chief executive his bonus based on making that profit. So what Hillary thinks we need to do is, first of all, stop giving capital gains lower tax treatment for people who want to invest in a year and a day. Look, if the Pennsylvania Public Employees Union, for example, invest in the stock market, they're trying to secure the retirement of their employees. They don't need their money in a year and a day. There's lots of evidence that shows that companies that care about their workers, care about their communities, care about their customers, do better over any 5 to 7 year period than companies that are run by billionaire activist shareholders who say, "Give me my money in a year and a day. I don't care if you shut down a profitable enterprise. I don't care if you have to go to overseas. I don't care what you do." So Hillary says, let's don't give it to them in a year anymore. Let's let them hold the stock for 5 years before they can get that, and phase it down over time. Don't do that. And if they get money from the state and local government, or from the federal government, or if they get federal contracts, and they move anyway for the shareholders and the top management, make them give it back. Make them pay an exit tax and invest in America and jobs that we can here. That way we can raise income. Inequality is a huge problem, but you've got to know what to do about it. I have spent a lifetime working on it. 100 times as many people moved from poverty into middle class through work when I was president than under trickle-down economics under the Republic. 100 times. The working class increased their incomes twice as much when we grew the economy from the middle out and the top down as they did under trickle-down economics. The middle class did 70% better. 95% of the people did better. You cannot let us go back to having a right-wing president, a right-wing Congress, and a right-wing Supreme Court. You will not recognize this country in 4 years if you do. And they've had it, and they blew it every time. It doesn't work. We need to build this economy from the middle out and the bottom up and invest in things that will grow the future and give these young people here a better future. That's how. And by the way, she is not on sticks. She wants to give companies that will share their profits fairly with their employees a 15% tax credit for doing so. We're going to spend money on corporations. Let's give it to them to help the people who are working there that make their profits possible in the first place. That's our position. And that will have a much bigger impact, I believe, than anything anybody else has proposed in either party. The second thing is, you've got to take down all the barriers that keep people from participating. And let's just talk about, well, let's talk about the cost of college first, and then I'll talk about healthcare and local economics. There's been a lot of talk here about what's the best way to make sure everybody can afford to go to college and manage their debt. And it's one of the differences in Hillary and her opponent in the primary. He says everybody goes to a state institution and they get free tuition without regard to income. Normally, it's not said that the states would have to come up with a third of the cost. You've been following your legislature and the governor and their fights? What do you think the odds are the Pennsylvania legislature will come up with a third of the cost? Hillary's got a plan that doesn't require that. But you have to do a little something. She said everybody should be able to get out of college debt-free, from a public university, a private school that represents and takes in disproportionately lower income students, working class students, African American, Hispanics, first or second generation immigrants, anybody that goes to a school that has a reasonable tuition and a decent graduation rate should qualify for help. Everybody that needs free tuition should get it. You lower income people should get more. We should have a whopping increase in the Pell Grant to cover not only materials but also costs of living. Then, people who can afford to pay tuition should pay it. Because if you raise higher income people's income taxes, which we'll have to, that should be done to invest in new jobs, new technologies, creating a middle class for the future. We need that money to create the jobs. If somebody's caught in the middle and they need more, she proposes to have a huge increase in work-study funds so that anybody who needed could work 10 hours a week, earn the money they need to survive. That's the only proposal that will actually hold down the rising cost of college, because it'll make it cheaper to operate. And what about the people that have debt already? Here's what happened to college debt. When I was president, I proposed the biggest increase in college aid since the GI Bill. 10 million more people got it. Unfortunately, President Bush suspended some of the things I proposed, and inflation ate up the rest. Then when President Obama took office, when there was a Democratic Congress, he proposed an even bigger program than I did. And unfortunately, inflation began to eat it up. So what happened? People that borrowed money under the federal system could pay it back as a small fixed percentage of their income. We got a doctor here? This is probably dehydration. We need some water too. Okay, you can't do anything about that, so don't bother me. That was gone. So more and more young people are borrowing money outside the federal system from private banks. Now here's the unbelievable thing about college education in America. A college loan is the only loan you cannot refinance. Do you all know that? I talked to a woman who lives in a little town north of where Hillary and I lived the other day, whose son just graduated from a state college in New York. She's really proud of him. He's done fine, but I said, does he have any debt? She said, quite a bit. What's the interest rate? 9%. I said, you still got a mortgage? She said, oh yeah. I said, did you refinance it? She said, sure I did. What's your interest rate? under 4. This is crazy. So Hillary says, first, let every student refinance their debt. That would save 25 million people in America, more than $2,000. 25 million people. Second, let people who have a lot of debt consolidate it into a mortgage-like instrument that they'll have up to 20 years to pay off. If they still owe anything, then forgive it. But limit their repayment to 10% of their after-tax income. I think what that means people can move out of their parents' house. That means people have a job they took to pay off the debt, and they want another one over here that paid less. They can take it because the debt payment will go down. That means, let's say somebody in Johnstown's always dreamed of starting a little business. They want to open a bakery or something. And it would only take a $50,000 loan. You couldn't get the loan now because the college debt would disqualify you. Not anymore. It's just a fixed cost. And if you start your business and you don't make much money the first year or two, your payment would go way down on the loan. This would liberate the energies of millions of young Americans and enable us all to rise together again. That's a big barrier we need to take down. Another thing we need to understand is, look around here. Places that have had high unemployment or high poverty rates for a longer period of time need more incentives for companies to invest in. And they also need a very aggressive plan to attack the prescription drug and heroin epidemic, because it is worst in small town and rural America where the economy is terrible. For example, in West Virginia, there are 2 counties now where the #1 source of male income is a disability check. And they have the 2nd weakest economy in America, and they have the highest rate of prescription drug and heroin addiction. These 2 things are connected. So she offered a $10 billion plan, first of all, to treat the drug problem like a public health problem. More mental health facilities, more treatment facilities, more support facilities. Second, to give extra incentives for people to invest in those areas, to give people something to look forward to when they get up in the morning, because they'll have a chance to get a job. And third, not to forget, I think this is the only thing she spends actually more money than her opponents promises to spend. Not to forget, we need to train people, even if they don't have 4-year college degrees, for jobs they can get that will give them a good middle-class lifestyle. And we need to put money in to creating those jobs, fighting the drug epidemic with mental health and treatment, and getting new investment. You got to do all 3 if you want us all to rise together. But look, we can do this. I know something about it. When I became governor of Arkansas in the early 80s, the middle of the country was just like rural Pennsylvania and West Virginia and all that today. And they told me it was hopeless. The time I came here running for president, we had the 1st or 2nd fastest growing economy in every month of 1992. It took me a while to turn it around, but we did it the old-fashioned way, by relying on the ability of the people at the grassroots level and giving them a chance to rise again. That's what we got to do here. We have got to do that. We can't leave any place behind. And there are lots of things we can do. We also need to have jobs that can be made in America and can't be exported. I'll tell you the interesting thing. Flint, Michigan, which got a lot of publicity over the lead levels in babies' blood, it is nowhere near the only place in America. Nowhere near the only place where rusty pipes are endangering the health of our children. She proposed an infrastructure plan that is more than roads and bridges and ports and airports. She said, look, if we tore up all the rusty pipes in America, we could lay some down and you couldn't export those jobs, and we could give all our children a healthy future and live to America at the same time. That's the kind of thing we need to do. Now, the other big problem is the health care. The good news is we have over 90% of our people insured for the first time in the history of the country. There are some gaps in the Affordable Care Act. Almost every state is going to wind up taking the Medicaid expansion for working families because it's good for the budget. is not only decent and humane, every state that's done it has created jobs, lowered the cost of health care, and increased the size of the state budget. It's only right-wing ideology that's keeping people from taking it. Then it'll be easy to get to 100. The simplest way is to let people over 55 who have some income buy into Medicare, and people under 55 who have some income buy into Medicaid. Or you can just have a whole lot more insurance companies in there. But we got to fix it, because the co-pays and deductibles of the individual market are too high. They're just too high. They're not working. The second thing we should do is do what every other big country in the world, including those that make drugs, do, and bargain for lower prices for people in health plans for prescription drugs. It is bankrupting people. But if you do that, and if you don't believe me, you can check this. You can go on the internet when I leave. In eastern Pennsylvania, in the Geisinger Medical Plan, which has hundreds and hundreds of doctors, you pay an enrollment fee. You don't pay by the procedure, you just enroll. Which means they do better if they don't make mistakes. They do better if they don't waste money. And every place in America, there's a plan like this in place. Healthcare premiums go down and the health of the people covered goes up. In the Geisinger plan, if you have to go back to the hospital for any reason related to your earlier care, they pay for it and nothing can happen to your premiums, your co-pays, or deductibles. They eat the loss. So all the incentive is on high quality health care. Every place this is being done, health goes up, costs go down. If you do these things, we can give the American people an affordable health system that they deserve, and healthcare costs will no longer be an excuse for companies not to raise their workers' pay. We have got to do this, and we need to do it urgently. And the difference between her and her opponent on this is he says you can't do it except for the single-payer system. And I just would remind you, nothing has happened since World War II in healthcare, including the Children's Health Insurance Program that I signed into law, without enough votes to break a Republican filibuster in the Senate. We don't have 60 votes. We won't have 60 votes after the next election, though I think we'll win the Senate by it. And all these House members have been in such terribly twisted gerrymandered districts, the Republicans are more afraid of a Republican primary than they are a Democrat. We don't want to put the health future of America into the hands of a gamble that can't materialize for 6 years. We need to fix this now. That's her position. I think it's the right position. And then, I just want to say one other thing about this drug thing. This means a lot to me. About 2 days ago, I had to make the 5th call to a friend of mine whose child died of an overdose. And it's not clear to me, one of them had a serious addiction problem. The other 4 just didn't know you can't mix alcohol and these pills and go to sleep or you may not wake up. Kills the part of your brain and tells your body to breathe. 5, this is personal to Hillary. One of those guys worked for Hillary when he died, had worked for me before. His dad's one of my best friends. He's an immensely successful person. He said, I'll give you $1 million to figure out how to fix this. And I said, I don't need that much. Give me a couple $100,000 a year and we'll figure out what to do. And we did. We first got this miracle drug naloxone called Narcan in an auto-injection form that was much cheaper than anything available, and started giving it to police departments and other first responders. Then we found another drug company, a good one. There are some really good ones. And a lot of them are quite small, but they're really responsible. They agreed, it's called the DAP, this drug company, they agreed to put out the first nasal spray version of this, which anybody can use to save lives. You can have it on every floor of every college dorm. And Pennsylvania was selected by this company with us to be the first place in America to make it available in every single high school in the country. It's a miracle. It'll bring people back. But what we have got to do is to educate people about it and give people something to look forward to in the morning. It is not enough to say, don't do something and treat it when it happens. That's important. But people have to not want to do it in the first place because they think they want a bright future. Look, there are a lot of other things that we need to do. But we can't do any of it by dividing the country. And that's why this Supreme Court opinion is important. Whatever your opinion is on various issues, surely we can all agree we ought to have a Supreme Court that expands voting rights, not contracts them. A Supreme Court that protects labor rights, not takes them away. A Supreme Court that believes all citizens should have as near as possible to an equal voice in election, not that money should buy elections. And, you know, Hillary was the first person who said, if I can't appoint a Supreme Court justice that will reverse the Citizens United decision, then I will try to get a constitutional amendment passed, because it is crazy to say that we live in a country where a billionaire and a minimum wage worker are equally free to spend whatever they want on politics. That Citizens United decision involves secret big money involved in a plan to attack her. And that's not why she's against it. But it's a little hard for me to take when she's criticized because she was a senator from New York and she had support for people who were in New York she tried to help, and so you can't trust anybody from New York. All I know is she was the first person out there on this. And you need to know, I hope President Obama gets Judge Garland confirmed. I think it's I know him well. I appointed him to the Court of Appeals. He was overwhelmingly confirmed. That's a big reason the Republicans don't want to give him a hearing. Because if they give a hearing, they'll have to say, why are they against you now when they were for you then? I'll tell you why. They like it when it was 5-4. On everything affecting their political interests. Just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court voted 4-4. In other words, they couldn't get a majority on a case that would have literally wrecked public employee unions in the United States. And we don't need the Supreme Court to make our political decisions for us. That's what we vote for. That's what we elect legislators for. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but at least the people are in the driver's seat. And I'll give you an example in the voting rights case. A lot of people think it's just for African Americans. That's not true. It's where there's any place there's a historic pattern of discrimination. So consider this. In Arizona, where Hillary won anyway, but it was hairy because Arizona decided to take full advantage of the Supreme Court voting rights decision, 5-4. There was one voting precinct for every 2,100 voters in every county in the state, except Maricopa, where Phoenix is, the most Democratic county in the state. There was one voting precinct for every 20,000 voters. I couldn't make this up. This movie is coming to a town near you if we don't have a Supreme Court that will stick up for ordinary Americans again and the fundamental principles of equality and justice and reason. So, you just have to decide what you believe. The two candidates have agreed on 93% of the time, and when they didn't agree, I really think Hillary was right. And I would have voted the way she did. I would have voted to save the auto industry, and I would have held my nose with President Obama and the other senators and voted to put some money on loan into the banks that didn't fail to keep us from going into a depression. You would not have been ahead if, in order to thumb your nose at the banks that didn't record as a change maker, and she's proved she could be commander-in-chief. She worked closely with Jack Murtha when I was in the White House on the victims of Agent Orange in the Vietnam War. She became the first New York senator ever to sit on the Armed Services Committee. A young man in uniform came up to me long after I left the White House. I was testifying in Congress one day on public health issues. And he said, you know, Mr. President, I just want to tell you something. I represent the Pentagon on Capitol Hill. And he said, you ought to know that over there we think your wife knows more about our issues than any other member of Congress, and that she cares about the men and women in uniform and their children. She doesn't always agree with us, but she has never pulled one cheap stunt. She has never taken one hit just to get a day's headline. She always wants to do what's right, and you cannot imagine what that means in a difficult world with all the conflicting pressures on us. And, you know, the other thing I would say is everything she got accomplished in the Senate and as Secretary of State, and with the Children's Health Insurance Program in the White House, and with an effort that increased adoptions out of foster care by 80%. She passed that bill with Tom DeLay, the House Republican leader, who disliked me more than anybody in Congress. But she talked him into doing it. When she got the Iran sanctions passed, which everybody liked, to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon, she got Russia and China to sign off. I didn't think she could do that. She got the only nuclear treaty, the only thing that survived our attempt to get along with Mr. Putin, something called the New START Treaty, which makes accidental or intentional nuclear war less likely. It took 67 votes in the Senate. It's a lot of Republicans. She got them. She knows how to get people together. Now I know they're mean, they say hateful things about her, but that's just because they don't want to run against her. I don't blame her, I wouldn't want to run against her. But it's just all politics. But once you take the oath of office, the blaming is over and it's on you. And you either stand and deliver and you change people's lives or you do not. And she believes, and our whole family believes, that all that really matters in public life is whether you can answer 3 questions yes. Are people better off when you quit than when you start? The children and young people have a brighter future. And are we coming together, not being torn apart? All over the world today, these questions are turning and churning people up. There are too many people in America who aren't better off yet. There are too many children and young people that don't have a brighter future yet. There are too many places, including in the political debates, particularly on the Republican side. I never forget when they were in Florida screaming and calling each other liars over each other's voices for 45 seconds. I thought I was looking at a hip-hop video. Where you can't say yes. All I can tell you is, from the time I met her 45 years ago to this day, she is the best change maker I have ever known. We can all rise together, but we got to create the jobs of the future. We got to lift incomes. We got to reduce inequality, and we got to rip away all the barriers to keep all of our people, without regard to their race, their religion, their background, their sexual orientation, you name it. Everybody that's willing to obey the law, everybody, ought to have a chance in this country. Everybody. And I wanted to make special mention because of where we are. This university is the future. This university's ability to make ties that bind with local businesses and create jobs and bring in new investment is the future. I'll give you an example. A lot of people know that Michigan and Ohio State have the biggest single campus enrollments in America. I'll bet you nobody knows what the third largest school is. The University of Central Florida in Orlando. Now you think of Orlando as Disney World. Also has the Universal Entertainment Park. You may have gone on vacation there. It is also the home now of a big video game company. And the Pentagon and NASA spend $5 billion a year in research there. You want to know why? Because they decided long ago that their future rested in becoming the best place in America for computer simulation. I mean, think of it. If you go to Disney World 2 times over 5 years, the second time you want to be better, right? You got to keep doing that. Video games need lots of computer simulation to keep us all addicted. There are 100 companies there, 100 doing this business. The community is reborn. We can do this here. We can do this everywhere. I spent a lifetime doing this, but we got to do it together. And so I ask you to vote for her because she got the best record, because she's the most qualified to be commander-in-chief, but more important than anything else, she's identified the problems, proposed solutions, her numbers add up, and she's the best single change maker I ever met. Thank you very much.